Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
Lucy got up from the table and looked sadly at the photo in the wooden frame. The woman sighed sorrowfully, looking at the picture of their dead son Anthony, and wanted to go to the kitchen to boil the kettle, but suddenly changed her mind. Instead, Lucy went to Anthony's room, which she and her husband had not even cleaned since their son's death. The older woman opened the door and looked around. She walked across the room and sat down at the computer table. A Rubik's Cube caught her eye. The landlady took it in her hands and looked at it thoughtfully. Lucy didn't know yet that today spent in this room would change her and her husband's life when they found the shocking message. She took a few turns on the toy and suddenly found herself immersed in her past. Lucy was born in the countryside and had always dreamed of leaving those places. Even as a child, she made a promise to herself that as soon as she finished school, she would definitely move to the big city. And being a child, she strived to fulfill her wish. To do this, she studied well in school when her peers tried to sneak out of the house to go for a walk. And Lucy, thanks to her dream, graduated from school with a gold medal and then entered the Pedagogical Institute in Moscow. The girl perfectly understood, studying in the first year, that one desire is not enough to stay to live in the metropolis. Lucy realized that after graduating from the institute, she would have to rent housing so as not to return to the village or get successfully married to a guy who lives in this city. And the girl actually met a man who was a Muscovite. Lucy had already finished her first year and she was about to go home for summer vacation, and she decided to take a walk on the sidewalk before leaving. The girl walked thinking about how she would spend her time in the village. She was so thoughtful that she didn't notice a young man who was reading something on the bulletin board. Lucy pushed the guy and immediately stopped. The girl looked at the man in surprise and hesitantly said, "I didn't hurt you. With your seductive appearance would be better bruised," said the stranger with a smile. "Don't be sly about looks. Who made you think of yourself in a negative way?" The man smiled in surprise. "I have a very ordinary appearance, a potato nose, and I have a lot of pigtails," sadly said the girl, who was really complex about her appearance. When she was at school, she often heard her peers calling her ugly duckling behind her back. "You shouldn't feel that way about yourself. Your freckles look good on you, and your nose is not a potato, but a little upturned, which is also very nice," replied the young man and immediately extended his hand. "My name is John. Let's get acquainted, and I'll tell you right away that I don't bite, and you shouldn't be afraid of me. I'm Lucy. Actually, I was not even scared, but thanks for the warning. It was interesting to hear about it at the beginning of the acquaintance. You're a really beautiful girl, and don't deny it. I'm really glad you pushed me and not the other guy. I'll explain why I'm saying this, because if you had pushed the other guy, I wouldn't have had a chance to meet you. Now that we're talking, let's take a walk and you can tell me all about yourself." "I'd like to suggest that we switch to you right away. I don't like to shout," John said. The girl nodded in response. The young people continued their walk together. From a new acquaintance, Lucy learned that the man was 27 years old, was not married, lives with his mother in a 2-room apartment. He works as a programmer in a small firm, likes to swim in the pool and occasionally visit the racetrack. After a while, Lucy said that she had to go to the hostel and John saw the girl off. Before leaving, John asked Lucy for her phone number and promised that he would call her again today. The girl smiled in response and then went to the dormitory. The couple began to meet from that day, but soon Valentina had to leave Washington because the summer vacation began. John begged the girl to stay in the city, but she refused, explaining to the young man that her parents would misunderstand her. On the day of departure, the man standing on the platform made a marriage proposal to the girl and at the same time stretched out a thin wedding ring. And on the same day, the couple kissed for the first time. Lucy responded to John's proposal with consent. Already sitting in the carriage, she thought that now she had the status of a bride, and she was pleased to realize it. The girl left reluctantly because her favorite person remained in Moscow, and she was already sure of her feelings. As soon as Lucy arrived in the village, she immediately informed her parents that she had a fiancé. Her mother and father took the news with joy, and in response wished her daughter happiness. Summer vacation flew by and Lucy returned to Washington, where she was met by John. The young man hugged the girl on the platform and kissed her on the lips. And then the man said, "Today you should rest after the road, so I'll escort you to the dormitory. But tomorrow you should tune up for a trip to my house. I'm going to introduce you to my mom. I warn you that she is a person with a difficult character, so be prepared for everything." I wish you hadn't said that. I'm starting to get scared. Why don't we wait to meet her? Because we still have time. Why would you be scared? I'll be right here with you. And I can assure you that my mom doesn't bite, so you don't have to be afraid. She's just a very unconventional person, but you'll realize that when you get to know her, everything will be just fine. Don't worry. The next day, John came to pick up the girl and they went to his house. Lucy was very worried about meeting her future mother-in-law. Before entering the apartment, she looked critically at herself in a small mirror and then asked the chosen one about her appearance. The man laughed in response and complimented her that she was his most beautiful bride. John opened the door with his key and invited the guest to pass. Lucy timidly stepped over the threshold, and soon a woman in a businesslike black Antonimo walked out to her. The man immediately smiled and said softly, "Mammy, here's Lucy. I told you a lot about her. Now let's get acquainted. My name is Betty." "Yes, son, you told a lot about her, but you forgot to add that this person is a bad girl. I never knew my son had such bad taste." Lucy, hearing this, swallowed nervously and turned silently to the boy. Meanwhile, the young man looked seriously at his mother and, clearly minting each word, said, "I asked you not to be rude, and we seem to have agreed with you. Why are you scaring my fiancée from the doorstep? She scares anyone with her looks. I can see why you didn't want to show me a picture of that ugly girl. And from what I understand, you proposed to her too. You're such a fast rider. Did you remember to tell her you're a lover of women's skirts? Lucy is the most beautiful girl in the world to me, and I love her. And you, Mom, you should respect my choices. And what women's skirts are you talking about? I'd assume we have a proper introduction, not an argument from the get-go," John said clearly. "You said she was a country girl. Where are you going to take her after the wedding? Do you think I'm going to let her stay with us?" "You will not wait," said the landlady sternly, and then turned her gaze to the girl and mockingly said to her, "You decided to get a Moscow residence permit to get my son's brainwashing. Do not be deceived. John is a man in love, and in a couple of weeks he will forget your name. Jesus, what kind of thrift store do you pick up your clothes at? It's so last century." Lucy felt her face turning red and tears welling up in her eyes. The girl forced herself to answer, "You don't even know me, and you speak so rudely. I am ashamed of your behavior in front of your son." After these words, Lucy turned around and left the apartment. She went downstairs and cried to tears. The girl could not think that she could be met by the mother of her chosen one. Lucy tried to hold back her tears, but she couldn't, and then she felt the man's arms around her. She pulled her hands away from her face and saw John, who spoke softly to her. "I'm sorry about Mom. I warned you she wasn't an easy person. Mom overreacted today, but wait, she'll change later. Everything will be fine, and you and she will get along great." "Yeah, Betty and I are never gonna get along. You saw and heard exactly what she said. I could imagine all sorts of things, but to be so insulting on first meeting her. Your mother will never bless you to marry me. Then you don't need a blessing. It'll work out. In fact, let's go for a walk, go to a cafe and sit there. You and I have a lot to talk about, like how we're gonna get married. Don't forget that you are my fiancé, and the other day we will go to apply," John said, and began to shower the girl's face with tender kisses. A few days later, the couple filed an application in the registry office. Lucy started a conversation with the groom about his mother, but the chosen one immediately transferred the conversation to another topic. The girl could only guess that the future mother-in-law does not want to deal with her, and this circumstance was very disturbing to her. After the application was filed, several days passed, and Lucy approached the groom about the wedding. She asked where the event would be celebrated. John offered the girl to choose a cafe herself. Lucy laughed in response and then made a thoughtful face and quietly said, "I understand that you don't want to talk to me about your mother, but now please don't dodge the answer. Is Betty still as hostile to me? She doesn't want to see me again. I'll be honest, Mom doesn't want to hear about you at all. She even says she's not coming to the wedding. She divorced my dad because of her temper. Dad's not alive now, though. What are we going to do with you? I don't know what to tell my parents. They're going to want to meet my sister-in-law, and she won't even come to the wedding. What am I supposed to tell my mom and dad? My parents are going to come to the wedding from the village. I'll tell my mother-in-law and father-in-law. Don't worry about that. We have other things to think about right now. Finding a cheap studio apartment to move into. You realize I'm not inviting you to live with me, although you can risk living with me. But I'm afraid that you can't stand 5 minutes with my mom, said the interlocutor. Oh, whoa. No, and I don't even want to risk it. I'm already starting to panic at the memory of meeting Betty, the girl said nervously, shrugging her shoulders. I understand, but she's my mom, so please don't be angry with her. Perhaps time will pass, and she will change her anger into mercy. She has no one but me. You know very well that you can't change a person at this age. I can even say that because of her character she has no friends. Can you imagine how hard her life is? It's hard for me to imagine because I'm not that kind of person. And when I have a son who wants to meet his fiancée, I'll never behave that way. And don't worry, I'll always treat Betty with respect. She gave you life and you are my happiness, which I love dearly. Time flew by quickly and the long-awaited wedding day arrived. There were not many people, as the newlyweds did not have a lot of money to celebrate the solemn day. The girl's parents came to the wedding and stayed in a hotel. The wedding took place. Lucy was over the moon with happiness. The only thing that overshadowed her was that her mother-in-law did not come to the event. The girl hoped to the last that Betty would come to congratulate her only son on such a solemn event, but it did not happen. Immediately after the wedding, the newlyweds rented a one-room apartment. Lucy rejoiced in her happiness. The young woman was actually glad that she had such a wonderful husband who, contrary to the opinion of her mother, took and married her. A year passed after the wedding. During this time, Lucy had never seen her mother-in-law. John visited his mother, and when the wife started talking about his mother, he replied that the parents are all right. Lucy saw how the chosen one is worried that his mother cannot reconcile with the fact that he married a country girl. The young woman even offered John to go and talk to Betty to them both. However, the lover pronounced, I don't see the point of it. She even about you does not give me anything to say. What conversation are you talking about? Well, let's not talk about sad things. What are you going to feed me? Meatless soup again. I've told you several times I'm gonna get a job. Like scrubbing floors, you realize we don't have enough money for food. At least my parents send money once in a while. No work. Study your subjects at the institute. About your parents helping you out. Was that a put down on my part? I don't specifically ask my mother for finances. She should realize that it's hard for you and me to live financially. I want my mom to offer her help from the bottom of her heart. So remember, I'm not going to beg. Honey, I'm not suggesting that you go to Betty. I'm just saying I could have gotten you a job. It was easier for us then. At least we had a penny to spare, she said quietly. We're done talking about work. I'd rather eat in soup without meat or even starve, but I will be calm that I will not steal my beauty from under my nose. Another 6 months passed, and then Lucy felt unwell. From the morning, the young woman was nauseous. She could not understand what was making her sick. The next day, the nausea continued, and it was only here that Lucy thought of a possible pregnancy. She went to the drugstore immediately after a couple at the institute, where she bought a pregnancy test. Once home, the young woman did the necessary procedure, and the test confirmed the pregnancy. Lucy was happy about this event, as she dreamed of a baby, and now she waited for the return of her husband from work to please him. As soon as the spouse came home, the girl hugged her lover and barely audibly reported the pregnancy. John was ecstatic that he would soon become a father. The man, after hearing this, kissed his wife tenderly and said that he wanted to share this news with his mother. Lucy looked at her husband and said, So call and tell her about it. Maybe the birth of the baby will bring Betty and me closer together, because she will become a grandmother. You're right. I'll call her right now. Why don't we go to her house and tell her together? I don't want to risk it. Why don't you do it yourself? Tomorrow's your day off, so go and see your mom. The next day, Lucy waited impatiently for her husband's arrival from her mother. The young woman was worried how Betty would take the news, and only as John appeared at home, she asked a lot of questions to him. The man embraced the chosen one and said, "The ice is broken. She congratulated me and you too. Even say more, she invited us to visit. That's very nice. I also notified mine. They congratulate us," the young woman said joyfully. The next day, however, tragedy struck. Lucy's father died. He was hit by a drunk driver. The young woman and her husband immediately left for the village for the funeral. Lucy was very worried about the death of her father, and when the coffin was already lowered into the pit, she felt sick. She woke up in the hospital, where a nurse told her that she had lost consciousness. Lucy anxiously asked about her pregnancy. The woman in a white coat looked sadly at the patient and quietly said, "You lost the baby too. It was not your fault. I know that it is unbearably bad for you now, but you have to hold on. You are still young, and you will soon get pregnant." Lucy covered her face with her hands and cried. She didn't hear the nurse come out, and her husband came in. Her husband sat down on the bed, leaned over, and began to gently kiss her hands. Lucy wanted to scream at this point, but there was a lump in her throat that she couldn't swallow. It was several minutes before the young woman was able to calm down. John, on the other hand, sat next to her and stroked her lover's shoulders. The girl looked at her spouse and quietly asked him, "Do you blame me? What kind of foolishness did you say? No one is not to blame. You had a nervous breakdown. And don't even think about it anymore. A little time will pass and you will get pregnant again. And even more than once, I guarantee you. I love you so much. I love you too, my sunshine. Now let's get some rest." A couple of days later, Lucy was discharged from the hospital, and then she and her husband left for Washington. The young woman was very worried about losing her child. John saw it well and suggested she go to her mother. The man hoped that Betty would support his wife morally in this difficult moment. John received no objection from the chosen one, and so he called his mother. He informed his mother that they wanted to check on her. Betty kindly agreed to host the two of them. At that time, the woman did not yet know that Lucy was no longer pregnant. When John arrived with his spouse at his mom's house, the man took his mother aside and told her under what circumstances his wife had lost the baby. Betty listened to her son and then said in a deliberately loud voice, "Why didn't you tell me this before? You chose a wife who can't even bear a child. I doubted her for a reason." "Mom, why are you talking so loud? I didn't tell you about Lucy's situation on purpose. She needs support at the moment. As a wise woman, you should support her morally. Find the right words, I'm begging you. I changed my attitude to your passport when I found out about the pregnancy, but now I am angry that a simple country girl who cannot bear a child and you are so hunted," said the landlady loudly. "What an obnoxious person you are." John turned around to go to his wife as Lucy herself approached him. The young woman looked at her mother-in-law and spoke softly. "You spoke so loudly on purpose so that I could hear. You have achieved your goal, I heard you. But you know your words don't offend me at all. I could say a lot of things to you, but I will not, because I promised your son that I will respect you, and I do it only because I promised. But believe me, your words will come back to haunt you. And I don't need your respect. I never dreamed of being respected by the country bumpkins. Wait another year and my son won't need you." The landlady was interrupted by John, who said, "Mom, you're out of line. Lucy is my wife and I won't let you hurt her, even though you're my mother. I am very sorry that I invited my wife to visit you. I hope that you have changed, but I was wrong. You are now with your own hands destroying the relationship with your daughter-in-law, who did nothing bad to you personally." After these words, John took his wife by the hand and pulled her to the exit. The man did not even begin to say goodbye to his mother. Lucy, as soon as she found herself on the street, she cried. The young woman couldn't understand why Betty felt that way about her. John stood nearby at that moment and asked his wife to apologize to his mother for all the words she had said. Lucy, trying to hold back her sobs, said, "Why did she treat me like that? Is it because I was born not in Moscow, but in the countryside? Are villagers any different from city dwellers? They're no different. Stop crying. The most important thing is that we're together. Let's go buy a cake and cheer ourselves up with some sweets." Time slowly moved on, and soon Lucy graduated from the institute and got a job at school as a history teacher. During all this time, the young woman did not meet John's mother and tried not to ask her husband about her. And when there was a phone call from Betty, she was very surprised. She answered and heard the pitiful voice of her mother-in-law. "I'm sick, and I can't reach John. He's not answering. I need to buy some medicine. Call an ambulance if you don't feel well at all. I can't be there for you for at least 2 hours. And John doesn't always answer because he's busy. Should I come to you?" "Yes, and as soon as possible," said Betty. Lucy wasn't particularly keen to go to John's mother's house, but she had no choice. She tried to call her spouse, but the chosen one did not answer. The young woman sighed doubtfully and began to quickly pack. After a while, Lucy was already at Betty's. The landlady was lying on the sofa and took her time explaining to her daughter-in-law what she needed to prepare for dinner. The young woman listened patiently to John's mother and mentally imagined that she would have to stay here for a long time. As soon as Betty gave all the orders, then the girl ran to the pharmacy to get some medicine. On the way back, she got a call from her husband and asked about her mother's health. Lucy, on the move, told everything and asked him to come as soon as possible. John said that he was on his way to them. The young woman came back and immediately handed the medicine to the landlady and then followed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Soon came John, who inquired first of all from his mother about his health and only wanted to greet his spouse, as he was stopped by his mother, who said, "I need help. I called the doctor at home today and they suggested I go to the hospital. And you know how I don't like to lie there, so I need you to stay here until I get better. I realize I'm interfering with your plans, but you have to understand me too. And son, you better tell your date that she'll be living here by my rules. Of course, we'll live with you. Hopefully, you two will probably become friends in the meantime. I'll go tell her you invited me to come here for a while." John went to his wife and told her about his mother's offer. The man thought that his wife would be happy about it. However, it did not happen. Lucy, in response, only sighed heavily. She absolutely did not want to live with her husband's mother, but she understood that it was also impossible to leave a sick woman alone. The next day, Lucy saw her husband off to work in the morning and then began to get ready herself. The girl went to the mirror and began to tint her eyelashes as she heard Betty calling her. The daughter-in-law headed towards the sick woman and approached and asked, "Did you call for me?" "Yes. If you want to talk to someone on the phone, please come out to the landing. You were talking to your mother yesterday and I had to wait for you to finish your conversation, and the time, by the way, was already 10 o'clock in the evening, and I'm falling asleep at that time. But I was talking softly and even more so with my mother," the girl said, perplexed. "I have my own routine and I'm not going to change it. I'm used to having silence at home, and if there's any chatter, it's only the TV, and that's when I need it. Are you saying that if your son calls, I have to go to the stairwell too?" "Don't be silly. I'm just letting you know that I like silence, so I'm telling you that too," the landlady said haughtily. "Okay, I heard you. What else am I not supposed to do while we're living here?" Lucy asked, barely containing her irritation. "Listen to me. Yes, and I forgot to tell you that in the morning I eat only freshly cooked oatmeal, so tomorrow before work," Betty replied. Lucy felt a wave of indignation coming over her. After all, only last night she had asked what to cook in the morning, then she was told that she could boil at her discretion. So Lucy fried scrambled eggs, and this morning there was already a statement about porridge. The young woman went to work in a bad mood. She imagined how unbearably difficult it would be for her to tolerate all sorts of such remarks from her mother-in-law. Lucy mentally prayed to God that Betty would recover as soon as possible and she and her husband would return to their rented accommodation. It had been 7 days since John's mother had been ill. During this time, Lucy had heard many caustic remarks from the old woman. However, the girl stoically endured all reproaches and did not try to enter into a dialogue with the landlady. She was even able to bear a barbed reproach from Betty that she had not been able to get pregnant for so long. The topic of children was especially painful for Lucy because in fact she and her husband had nothing. And the young woman had already been repeatedly examined together with John, but the doctors spread their hands and said that everything was fine with their health. Betty knew about it from her son, and the old woman did not hesitate to jab her daughter-in-law with it. A few more days passed and John's mother reported that she was much better. For Lucy, this news was a delight. The young woman breathed a sigh of relief, because now finally the nightmare that she does everything wrong and through the stump will be over. The young woman immediately packed her things and offered her husband to leave the same day. John looked at his spouse with surprise and said, "Let's live a few more days. It seemed to me that you and my mother found common ground. I even wanted to offer you to live here so we can save money. You seem to think we were friends with your mom. I don't want to be bullied every day anymore. You can stay, but I'm leaving right now." "What's gotten into you?" "All right, we'll do it tonight, but don't be so nervous." "We don't need to fight over nothing," John said, perplexed. "It may be nothing to you, but it's not to me. I'm exhausted from living here. I promised you I wouldn't stir up trouble with Betty, and I kept that promise. Your mother hasn't heard a swear word from me, but believe me, I'm not an Iron Man and my patience can run out too." "Okay, calm down. Tonight is tonight. Let's do it quietly," the man said dejectedly. The couple returned to their rented apartment and life went on. As the years passed, Lucy was still unable to get pregnant. She often looked at her students and mentally asked the Almighty to give her the opportunity to become a mom at least once. But time passed and her wish was not fulfilled. Valentina was repeatedly called by her mother and constantly asked when she would give her a grandson or granddaughter. These conversations drove her to sobs, and then her husband began to stick to a bottle of white. The woman realized that the years were flying by and her spouse was desperate that they had no children and started drinking alcoholic beverages. And once again, when her husband came in a drunken state, Lucy, with tears in her eyes, said, "I can't go on like this. Why are you torturing yourself? Let's get a divorce. Maybe with another woman you will have a full-fledged family. I just can't bear to see you binge on hard liquor. I'd had enough of your mother's lecture that I can't give you in here, and you found solace in a bottle of white water. Why don't I do the same?" "Let's leave this ridiculous conversation till tomorrow," the man said, twisting his words, and without taking off his jacket, he fell on the sofa. Lucy burst into tears. She realized that it was not necessary to start this conversation at the moment, as her husband was in a deranged state and would not remember anything tomorrow. The woman decided that she would continue this conversation in the morning. The next day was a day off and Lucy brewed coffee and sat down in the kitchen, waiting for the awakening of the chosen one. Soon John got up and joined his wife. The man, as always, apologized for his behavior and poured himself a glass of milk. Lucy immediately suggested to him to get a divorce. The husband emptied the glass in a few gulps and said softly, "What kind of nonsense are you telling me? What divorce? I don't need any other woman besides you. I chose you and I will never give up. Yes, I do not hide that addicted to strong drinks and need to stop with this case. But I also want to tell you that it's time for us to go on a vacation. Why don't we go to the seaside this summer? How about it?" "I don't know what to say. Maybe you're right and we need a change of scenery because we're completely exhausted. The sea is the sea. But if you go on strong drinks, then honestly our union will come to an end and we will divorce, as it is impossible to live like this." A month later, the couple went to the sea where they had a wonderful time. Back Lucy, even in Washington, was not particularly eager to go, but the spouse was running out of vacation. And soon the couple returned to the capital, and just a short time later, Lucy learned about her pregnancy. The woman could not believe that her wish had come true. She held in her hands a test, which clearly showed 2 blue stripes. Lucy was already anticipating that very soon she would become a mom and hold her baby in her arms. As soon as her husband came home from work, Lucy announced her pregnancy in a low voice. The man shook his head and asked why she decided so, and then she solemnly handed him the test. John turned the result in his hands and for some reason whispered, "What if this test is a lie? There's no such thing, but it's possible. Run and buy another one and then you will be 100% sure. Only buy another company," said the happy woman. The man, having heard the request of his wife, rushed to fulfill it unconditionally, and literally in 20 minutes handed his wife the test. The woman immediately went to the bathroom, where she did the necessary procedure. And soon she came out and proudly handed over a second test, which also clearly showed blue stripes. John was unspeakably happy and began to circle the chosen one around the room. When the first joy passed, the head of the family immediately suggested that his wife quit her job. Lucy looked at him with bewilderment and asked, "Why on earth should I stop working?" "So you do not worry about your students for nothing. We cannot take risks. I need to make sure that you are not nervous, and I will be calm in the case when you stay at home." "You're talking nonsense. I don't get nervous at school. You better think about how you're going to tell your mother about this. Tomorrow, I'll go and check on her and tell her the good news. Let our old lady to rejoice, because she constantly harasses me when I divorce and find another woman," half-jokingly, half-seriously said the husband. "Betty and his repertoire. How many years have we lived, and she has never accepted me as her daughter-in-law," she replied with a laugh. The next day, Lucy knew that her husband would be late after work because he would visit his mother. Therefore, the woman was not particularly worried and did not wait for the imminent return of the chosen one. However, the doorbell rang and Lucy went to open the door. Lucy was surprised to see John with her mother on the doorstep. Lucy only wanted to ask something, but she was prevented from doing so by Betty, who held out her hands and said, "Come here and I'll give you a hug. My son called me this morning and told me the news. I asked him to wait for me at work, and here we have made you a pleasant surprise. We're standing in front of you. By the way, I even bought a cake to celebrate. You've amazed me so much, I don't know what to say. You seem to me an impregnable fortress, and now deign for so many years to come to our rented apartment," embarrassed daughter-in-law said. "Well, do not grumble, or I'll change grace to anger. I actually am with a proposal to you. Enough of you from house to house jumping. Why don't you just move in with me? I think we can still get along. I promise you, sister-in-law, that I'll be more cooperative. But you must listen to me," said Betty. "You never cease to amaze me today. I feel as if the world has completely turned upside down," Lucy said, a little frightened, and then suggested that they continue the conversation in the kitchen. A month later, the couple moved in with Betty. Lucy was not very eager to move in with her mother-in-law, as she did not believe that a person could change overnight. At first, there were clashes between the women, but over time, Lucy got used to communicating with the landlady. By the time of childbirth, she even called her mother-in-law Mom, which pleased her husband. Soon a strong baby was born, which the couple named Anthony. The boy grew up an active and healthy child. Lucy with pleasure fiddled with the child. It gave her pleasure to watch how the Sonny every day makes new achievements in life. When Anthony was 3 years old, he was put in kindergarten, so that the boy learned to communicate with peers. Betty was against it, but the parents insisted on their own, and never regretted their decision, as the kid told with passion about the time spent in kindergarten, and reported all the details of the boy, desperately gesticulating, which often made adults laugh. The years slowly flew by. Anthony's parents continued to work. The boy went to kindergarten, from where he was alternately taken then Betty and Lucy. Mother-in-law with special care treated her grandson, which is very unspeakably pleased daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law was worried for one thing that the landlady would pass on to her son her bad habits, so the woman often said to her husband, "Maybe you talk to your mother and ask her to say less obscenities in front of the child." "What nonsense are you talking about? Look at the way Anthony's reaching out to his grandmother. I get the feeling he's more interested in my mother than his own parents. That's what I'm afraid that my son, when he grows up, will start calling me a country bumpkin," said the wife arrogantly. However, time moved forward quietly, and Lucy noted that the mother-in-law is actually great with her grandson. The old woman turned out to be a born inventor. She, together with Anthony, made various fakes out of various improvised materials, which were then taken to the kindergarten. When Anthony was 7 years old, Harry's mother died suddenly. The son was very worried about the absence of a native person. Lucy also mourned the passing of her mother-in-law. She had grown close to Betty over the past few years and was quite accustomed to taking caustic jokes in her address. Time flew by imperceptibly, and soon Anthony finished school and was preparing to enter a higher institution. The young man dreamed of following in his mother's footsteps and working as a teacher of algebra and geometry. Parents approved of their son's choice. Anthony soon entered the institute. The boy studied for 6 months and came home in a pensive mood. The mother immediately noticed this state in her son, so she politely asked what had happened. The young man hesitantly said in reply, "I think I have fallen in love." "That's wonderful. I just hope that you are not going to go to the registry office tomorrow." "Mom, you're being ironic, but I'm being serious. I can't get that girl out of my head. We met in a cafe. She was drinking a milkshake alone and looking sadly out the window. I admired her profile and came over to meet her. When Sarah turned to me, on the second part of her face, I immediately saw a scar that stretched from her temple to the middle of her cheek. I purely involuntarily flinched and the girl grinned and turned away from me again. I felt like an idiot at that moment because I had made it clear to Sarah that her face was disfigured. I stood there silently for a few minutes, not knowing what to do, and after a while she just told me to leave. It was only after that I could offer to meet her, because I couldn't just walk away. And what happened next? The mother asked with interest. "Mom, you asked such a childish question." "Naturally acquaintance," Sarah told me about herself, and I in turn about myself. Then we just went for a walk, and I walked her home. We've been talking for almost a month now, and only now I realized that this person is very dear to me, my son said thoughtfully. "You need to pull everything out of you. Why don't you tell about your chosen one? Who she is, where she studies, what kind of family?" answered the mother and looked at her son carefully after this phrase. The young man only wanted to answer as his father returned from the store. John walked into the room and looked at his household. The head of the family said in astonishment, "What's going on here? I must have missed something, because you are sitting in silence and Anthony is not rushing to the evening walk, as he has been doing lately. The guy thinks his parents have gotten older and they are watching with redoubled interest at their offspring's behavior." "John, you missed a lot, namely the story of our son's feelings for a young lady, but our boy did not have time to tell us much about the girl, because your arrival cut him off at half a word," replied his wife with a smile. "Very interesting. Anthony, let me sit next to you and listen to who my son fell in love with. You are not a young man anymore and you know what to say to the fair sex only in one case, when you are sure of your feelings," John said and looked at the boy without any smile. Anthony gathered his courage and told his mother and father about his beloved. From the narration, the parents learned that the girl works as a salesperson in a cell phone store. Sarah is 19 years old and lives with her grandmother. The chosen one of the son of her parents does not remember her parents since they died when she was 6 years old. The girl was raised by her maternal grandmother. Lucy, after her son's story, asked him when he was going to bring Sarah to meet her. It was as if the boy had been waiting for this question and immediately promptly replied that he planned to do it tomorrow. The woman nodded in response and said that she should think of something special to make for tomorrow then. Shortly after this conversation, Anthony left to meet his lover, and Lucy turned to her husband. "Don't you think that our boy is a little early for a serious relationship? Because he only recently turned 19 years old. How old were you when you fell in love with me?" "I was the same age," laughingly replied the head of the family. "You are wrong and not serious. Perhaps you forgot that girls grow up before guys, so you gave an example of an unfortunate situation. It just seems to me that your son is still just a first crush, not real feelings. Why haven't you talked to him alone about it?" "We don't have to guess and guess now. Time will tell. And now let's think about what you will cook interesting on the occasion of acquaintance with the beloved son," calmly replied the husband. Lucy jokingly threatened her husband with her fist and began to list her specialties, which she was good at in particular. John listened to his wife, and when she said about the duck stuffed with apples, he immediately stopped her. The wife laughed and threatened her fist again, adding, "You always choose duck, as a big meat eater and our son all in you went to taste. Then tomorrow we'll see if Anthony's taste is the same from the looks of it." "I've been in love with one person for many years," the head of the family said with a laugh. As soon as Lucy heard this, she immediately became serious. The woman told her husband about the scar on her face and asked his husband not to look at Sarah at the first meeting, so as not to embarrass her, as his son did at the first meeting. John did not contradict his spouse and agreed. The man only asked how the girl got this scar. The wife did not answer, as she did not know anything about it. After the conversation with the chosen one, Lucy thought about it. She perfectly remembered her first acquaintance with her late mother-in-law and how much she worried then. Therefore, the woman decided for herself that in no way would not let her son's chosen one realize that she cared about the girl's appearance. Lucy would not want to cause Anthony's beloved the same suffering that she received in the distant past from John's mother. The next day, the acquaintance took place. Lucy, as promised to her husband, baked a duck in the oven, and cooked mashed potatoes as a side dish. The head of the family bought a carrot top cake for the occasion. And when Anthony and the girl came, the festive table was already set. Lucy politely asked the guests minor questions about work hobbies. The chosen one of her son tactfully answered and behaved quite appropriately. Sarah tried not to be embarrassed when she occasionally threw glances at her, but the girl hardly managed it. She no and became crimson. Lucy felt genuinely sorry for the guest at this point, and she decided to help her get rid of her embarrassment. The older woman turned to Sarah. "I can see that you are very worried. I can see that with the naked eye, and I can guess why you're doing this because of your scar. But let me tell you that my husband and I, for example, are attracted not by a charming appearance, but by the soul of a person. So don't be embarrassed when we look at you. Very soon I think we will become friends and you will understand my words." Sarah, nervously at the phrase of the interlocutor, rubbed the edge of her blouse. The girl felt that she was blushing again and it made her uncomfortable. And then the guest suddenly spoke. "Yes, I have a disfigured face, but it's not my fault. It just always seems to me that when people look at me closely, they either mock me in their hearts or pity me immensely, and I don't want that at all. And maybe you're right that we'll become friends. I'd like that too, but it's too early to tell. Nobody's accusing you of anything, and they're not going to. Our son likes you, and that's the most important thing. And take my word for it that my husband and I are not going to mock you." Lucy tactfully replied and slid a plate with the cake to the girl, suggesting that she start eating the sweet treat. "Thank you, but I'm really full of your duck, which is cooked just marvelously. My grandmother cannot bake, so I'll be sure to get your recipe. And now, not to go back to the scar, I'll tell you about it in a nutshell, because I know you'll ask about it in the future. It happened a year ago when I was coming home from a friend's house. It was the beginning of 10 in the evening. The time was still late, and I was walking calmly, as in one of the alleyways to me jumped two guys. One of the thugs had a broken bottle in his hand, and like any other girl, I screamed out loud in fright. One of the guys started tearing my blouse, and the other one told me to shut up with the bottle. But I was not going to give up so easily and kept on screaming. And then one of the bandits slashed me in the face with a bottle, and then I vaguely remember. I saw several strong men who rushed to my rescue, and I woke up in the hospital when my cheek was stitched up. Since then, I'd had this scar in my memory. I'll tell you right away that those scumbags were caught. There was a trial and they received a prison sentence. But I just do not feel better about it. You know, a scar doesn't just disappear. That's my story." The head of the family sat with his spouse and son and listened to the guest's story in silence. The first to break the silence was Lucy, who tried to cheer up Sarah with words. "Don't worry, it's all behind you now. And the scar is nothing to worry about. You just think about what these hooligans could do. The main thing is that they were punished and are responsible for it, and in the near future will not do such things. And in general, let's talk about positive topics. I suggest that you write down the recipe for cooking duck so that your grandmother can feed you deliciously on any of the holidays." Sarah stayed a while longer and then went home. Anthony warned his parents that he would see the girl off and be a little late. The mother waved back with a smile, and as soon as the front door closed behind her son, she immediately turned to her husband with a question about whether he liked Anthony's girlfriend. The husband was silent for a while, and then answered, "I saw in her quite an adequate and reasonable person. She is not broken, as now likes to communicate with the current youth. She has no gesture and other feminine things. In general, I can't say anything bad about the girl at this stage of acquaintance. What do you think about it?" Sarah seemed vulnerable to me, but maybe that's a misleading first impression. You know, the most important thing for you and me is that they love and respect each other. That's the only way they can both build a strong family down the road. Like you said, time will tell. Let's wait and see. A couple of months passed after the meeting. During this time, Anthony managed to get acquainted with the grandmother of the chosen one and to get her favor. Sarah visited her lover a couple more times, and Lucy already clearly realized that the young people are going to soon start living together. As here, Anthony came home gloomy and reported that he broke up with a girl. The mother of the guy looked at her son in bewilderment and asked him to explain himself. Anthony replied that he did not want to talk about this topic at the moment. The woman did not bother her son with questions. She decided that the guy himself will tell everything when the time comes. However, a week passed, and Anthony still came home after school and did not go anywhere else. Lucy again tried to talk to her son about Sarah, but Anthony again avoided answering. And then the woman turned to her husband to talk to the native child man to man. The woman told her husband, "You are a father, and maybe your boy will confess everything that they have with the girl happened there. You see how he suffers. I just heartbreaks from worrying about him." That same evening, John came into his son's room and said softly that he was worried about Anthony and Sarah, adding that his mother was nervous. Anthony asked his father to change the topic of conversation, but the head of the family was adamant and made it clear to his son, until he hears the answers to his questions, he will not go anywhere. Meanwhile, Lucy sat in the hall and waited for the end of the conversation. The woman was actually worried about the emotional state of her child. She even wanted to go to the door to overhear the dialogue between the two men, but immediately forced herself to throw such an idea out of her thoughts. Soon John came out of his son's room and went to the kitchen. His wife hurried after him, and only there the woman with anxiety in her voice said, "Come on, tell me quickly. I already thought that you sat down to watch a soccer match there, that you were so long. You could have wrapped up the conversation faster, so that I'm not nervous here." What can I tell you? Sarah was a jealous girl. She used to give Anthony a hard time for looking at another girl, for getting a phone call from a classmate. In the end, all this bored Anthony and he proposed to break up. Sarah got the idea and doesn't make contact anymore. That's our son walking around like a black cloud. It's a corny story, and I don't even have a comment on it. Whoa, wait, but Anthony's really committed to Sarah, and it shows. You need to talk to the girl, make it clear that it's stupid to be jealous over nothing. You probably didn't realize there was a way to reconcile through conversation. You need to get the girl's phone number from your son. You can see how he's suffering. You're an interesting woman, and if Anthony does not want to give Sarah's number, then what do you propose me to force the numbers out of him? You're not a stupid man. The first gray hair has already appeared. You just have to find such words that Anthony gave you Sarah's number and do it today, because I want to meet the girl tomorrow. The man looked at his wife with an incomprehensible look. However, Lucy frowned her eyebrows, which meant that her wife would not back down. John again went to his son's room and after a while returned and handed his wife a piece of paper on which the girl's number was written down. Lucy called Sarah from work the next day and asked for a meeting. The girl did not refuse, and soon they were both sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee. Anthony's mother first asked the interlocutor how she was doing, and then said without preamble, "I know that you are in quarrel with my son, and the reason for your separation is also known. Can I ask you why you think Anthony is unfaithful to you? I just want you to be honest with me, because I don't like falseness in communication. I'm tired of him looking at other girls when we're out walking, and how many times he gets a call from Julia, and she's always sweet-talking him. Do you think that's normal? I, for one, don't like it. I told him about it repeatedly, but he paid no attention and I'm tired of it." Sarah replied indignantly, "But wait, girl, all that you just reported, it is not a fact that Anthony has other relationships. He's probably getting a call from a classmate, and they're obviously talking about school. Just realize that you can't just jump the gun like that. You need to meet and express your grievances with each other. That's the only way you'll be able to reach an understanding. And I can see that you're completely ignoring Anthony. Maybe it's not because you're jealous, but because you don't like him anymore and you're just cold to him. I find it offensive when my young man walks next to me and looks at blondes or brunettes. I don't know what Anthony told you, but it's not my fault we broke up. And I didn't get cold to him. I just have my own female pride, which I won't let anyone trample on," the girl said with tears in her eyes. "You calm down now. Let's make a deal with you so that I will talk to my son, and then you both sit down peacefully at the negotiating table. It's just that I can see how Anthony's suffering, and so can you. How did you ever envision a life together after that? Realize that everything is not smooth. There must be bumps, and only a woman with her cunning can completely tame a man. Are you willing to accept this offer to meet Anthony?" "Okay, but only on one condition, that he turns first," Sarah replied quietly. Lucy returned home later than usual that day. The husband knew that his wife would have a conversation with the girl, but Anthony was surprised to see his mother coming home from work much later. The boy looked at his mother questioningly. The woman knew perfectly well what she wanted to ask her son, and only Anthony wanted to ask the question as Lucy softly spoke. "I went out with your girlfriend. Isn't it funny to you that you two loving people are pissing each other off over nothing? You're giving her a reason to be jealous and she's falling for it. Why do you look at other girls when you're out with her? For example, I wouldn't like it if your father looked at Masha, Klava, or Sveta while walking with me. Stop it, Mom. I only once looked at a girl. I thought it was my former classmate and explained it to Sarah, but she doesn't want to hear anything. She made a tragedy out of this isolated incident, and about Lida calling, it's a disaster. My classmate and I just talk. There are no taboo topics. Okay, son, call your girlfriend and try to talk. I don't have anything else to advise you." Anthony answered his mother with an affirmative nod, and at the same moment he got ready and went out. Lucy guessed that her son had gone to Sarah to talk to her. The woman mentally wished the boy good luck, and only then reported her conversation to her husband, who was patiently waiting for news from his wife. The young man made up with his beloved and was again always in good spirits. Lucy was sincerely happy for her son. However, the joy was short-lived. After a couple of months again, there was a conflict situation and the young people quarreled. The reason for the spat was again Sarah's jealousy. Anthony's mother did not know how to establish relations between young people. Lucy even went to talk to the girl's grandmother to influence her granddaughter. And when a gaunt old woman opened the door to her, she immediately introduced herself and said, "Why? I'm Anthony's mom and I'd like to talk to you, Natalie, about Sarah. Maybe you could have a conversation with your granddaughter. I mean, they love each other, but they can't get along. Sarah's always picking on the guy, and the guy freaks out and walks around like a black cloud with no mood. Yeah, I've talked to my granddaughter and Anthony, but it's all to no avail. I can only assume that Sarah is complex about her looks, and that's why she's acting like this. And Anthony can't say no to Julia, who's always calling. I've already advised them not to talk to each other for a while and to take a break from each other or to start living together, but they agree and then they fight," Natalie said. "It's like a vicious circle. Thank you for keeping up with our sweet couple, but sometimes it seems to me that in the near future, they will just run away and hate each other," sadly said the guest and left Natalie's apartment. The woman was disappointed after the conversation, as she had hoped that the two of them and Sarah's grandmother would find a way out of the difficult situation, but it did not happen. Quarrels and reconciliation of young people continued for a year, and at some point Lucy stopped believing that her son and his chosen one would create a family in the future, which she directly told Anthony. "You're just torturing yourselves. You cannot get along. Run away completely already. I don't have enough fingers to count the number of times you've gotten back together in a year. It's an outrage neither of you wants to give in to each other. You also cannot understand that we adults are worried about you, and you are all playing games." The young man listened attentively and then looked seriously at his mother and calmly said, "We will not make up again. The last quarrel is a fiasco. Talking about jealousy was only an excuse to break off the relationship. We had a calm talk with her yesterday, and she admitted that she has a boyfriend on the side that she likes. And you know, Mom, I'm not going to form a love triangle. So I wished her happiness and a long life. Don't worry, there won't be any more reconciliation. What am I, after all? A little kid to be fooled around like this? I'd definitely run out of patience. I find it hard to believe that Sarah would turn out to be such a two-faced person. Although maybe she said it to piss you off, to make you jealous. I'm not interested in that anymore. If she said it to piss you off, she got what she wanted and more. I just don't want to talk to her. Son, don't worry, you'll meet the only one who will make you happy. Look at your classmate Lida, who calls you a lot. I think she has a soft spot for you. Now I want to be without any relationship. So let's not talk about this topic for a while, and especially do not call me the name Sarah. I do not want to know anything about her." Time moved on leisurely. Soon Anthony's parents retired, and he finished his studies at the institute and got a job at the school where his mother had taught before. During this time, the young man tried to arrange a personal life with two girls, but he did not succeed. About Sarah, Anthony never again remembered and did not start a conversation about her. Lucy now dreamed of her son finding a woman and becoming a family man. She often started talking to Anthony about it, but the guy only joked about it. And so when the woman once again started a conversation about family, the young man suddenly interrupted his mother and asked, "Where can you get a large sum of money?" "Strange question. In the bank at interest," replied the mother. "I see. What was the question about? You never asked just like that," the elderly woman said, perplexed. "All Mammy changed the subject," the boy said sharply. Since that day, Lucy noticed that her son again comes home without mood. The woman thought that most likely there were problems on the personal front again. She tried to talk to Anthony, forced to talk to her son and her husband, but all attempts to find out the cause of the disgusting mood were unsuccessful. It had been a month since Anthony was often late after work and came in quite late. Lucy was very worried about her son. Her female intuition suggested that the boy had some serious problems, but he did not want to worry his parents. And when the son came home with a black eye, the mother sounded the alarm and nervously turned to Anthony. "And this is you telling me that you are doing well?" "No, son. You're going to talk to me today, and I'm not going to let you go. You can take my word for it. Maybe you're seeing a married woman or someone's taking money out of you. Just say the word, and your father and I will go straight to the police. Let the law enforcement agencies take care of it. That's what they're for, to restore order in the country. Mommy, please don't worry. I'm not dating a married lady, and no one is extorting money from me. Just today, I ran into some juvenile hooligans, so I had to teach them a little politeness. I myself, of course, got a little, but they did not seem a little. I don't like this. You become secretive, my boy, and my motherly heart can't just go away. It's better to tell everything honestly, and together we will solve the problem." However, the young man did not answer his mother, but only affectionately embraced the woman and went to his room. Lucy sighed heavily and mentally asked the Lord that everything would get better in Anthony's life. After that, a couple of days passed, and now the woman once again waited for her son's return. The time was already showing the 12th hour of the night. The head of the family approached his wife and suggested going to bed, but she refused. Lucy knew that occasionally her son did not come home at night, but the guy always warned about it in advance. And on this day, Anthony did not call, and his mother could not reach him either. All night, the old woman didn't sleep a wink. She looked out the window for the figure of her son, who was not there. John saw how her spouse was worried and tried to support her morally, saying that everything would be fine. But in this, the head of the family was mistaken. Anthony did not return in the next day. Lucy called the school where her son worked, but she received the answer that Anthony did not come to the educational institution in the morning. The woman was in a panic because previously their boyfriend had never allowed himself to do such a thing. The sorrowful event came a day later. Lucy received a call from an unknown number, and a person introduced himself as an investigator. The law enforcement representative said that they found a male body with documents in the name of Anthony. The woman listened to the investigator and could not understand what this man wanted from her. Then the husband picked up the phone and asked questions. "What is your reason for calling? What do you need?" "You need to come to the morgue to identify the body," the investigator replied. "Are you all crazy?" "What body?" John shouted indignantly. At the other end of the phone, they repeated the name that was on the passport and insistently suggested to come to the morgue. John wrote down the address and looked at his wife, who was waiting for clarification from her husband. The man swallowed the lump that stood in his throat and barely audibly said, "We are in grief. I think our son is no longer in this world." The investigator called and said only that. "We need to identify the body, and they are already waiting for us there. We have to get ready." As soon as Lucy heard that, she sank to the floor and sobbed helplessly. The husband rushed to the medicine cabinet, where he quickly dribbled the sedative and offered his wife to drink the medicine. The woman uncomplainingly complied with the request, while still sobbing convulsively. John persuaded his wife to calm down, and when he realized that she was unable to go to the identification, he invited a neighbor to sit with Valia while he was absent. Soon the man identified the body of his son, and then answered a number of questions from the investigator. And only after that John asked how his Anthony died. The law enforcement officer said that the body was found by a janitor in a back alley. He called the police. And then the investigator added that Anthony died from multiple stab wounds at the scene. The man nodded in response and asked another question. "Tell me, did they find these scumbags?" Neighbors were interviewed. but they could not find any witnesses to the crime. And the janitor did not say anything clear, but we continued to work, replied the uniformed worker. John returned home grief-stricken. He could not imagine how he would tell his wife all this. The elderly man entered the apartment and saw that no one was there. He rushed to a neighbor, who told him that his wife had been hospitalized. Her heart was bad. John immediately went to the hospital, where he remained seated until evening. The doctor tried to send the man home to rest for the night and then come back again, but Lucy's husband refused flatly. He was afraid that this day he would also lose his wife. The next morning, John was allowed to visit his wife and was strictly instructed not to tell her any disturbing news. The man looked perplexed at the doctor and asked, "What am I supposed to say about our boy since he is not alive? She will definitely ask me about it. In your case, I would deceive my wife, because any excitement can end tragically for Lucy. As soon as your wife is better, you will tell her. For now, just say that the body is not your son's," the doctor replied politely. John entered the room where his wife was lying. She turned towards her husband and asked in a whisper, "This is not our son, is it?" "No, sweetheart. The police got the wrong person. I want you to hang in there and be strong, and we'll give Anthony a beating when he gets here. So call him. Maybe he's home already." With hope in her voice, said the patient. John promised to call, and after a while he went home. Now the man thought about when and under what circumstances to tell the truth to his wife. It was impossible to postpone the funeral for a long time, and how long his wife will stay in the hospital is completely unknown. The doctors did not give certain predictions, but guessing and inventing an elderly man did not have to. All his lies were revealed the next day when he came to check on his wife. Lucy asked if her son had come, and in response, she saw her husband look away. The elderly woman immediately guessed everything. She screamed. The medical staff came running, and the visitor was asked to leave the room. John sat in the corridor and waited for the doctor to come out to find out about his wife's condition. The doctor came out of the room and said that now the woman was given a sedative injection and she would fall asleep. The elderly man thanked the medical worker and stayed waiting in the hospital. He wanted to talk to his wife before he started the funeral arrangements. After a while, Lucy regained consciousness and her spouse came in to see her. The woman lay staring at the ceiling, tears rolling from her eyes, which she did not wipe away. The man sat down next to her and stroked her arm, and then softly said, "I know you don't have time for me right now, but you need to think about the funeral. I am also very sad, like you, but we must pull ourselves together and be strong, for the sake of our son's memory." And then Lucy interrupted her husband. She whispered, "You're not a stupid man and you'll organize everything in a Christian way. Only be sure to agree with the doctor to let me go to see my boy to his last journey. And now you leave me. I want to be alone to put my thoughts in order." The husband nodded silently and gently kissed his wife on the cheek. Leaving the room, he turned to the nurse and asked the girl in a white coat to look after his chosen one. The man was very worried that his beloved could do something to herself, so he asked the nurse. Sometime later, the funeral took place, where there were a lot of people. Many good words were said in honor of the deceased and many flowers and wreaths were laid. Lucy stood beside her husband, who supported her under the elbow. The woman looked at the grave mound and cried silently. She realized that she would never hear Anthony's voice again and he would never kiss her tenderly on the cheek. The old woman sat in Anthony's room and rubbed the Rubik's Cube, remembering her life. She was distracted from thinking by the voice of her husband, who came in quietly and quietly said, "Decided to sorrow a little alone? I'm looking for you, and you're in your son's room. You know, John, you and I kept everything in Anthony's room. Why don't we clean it up? We're old men waiting to grow old alone, and we got nothing better to do, so we'll clean it up. And we'll remember how we raised our Anthony. Maybe it'll make us feel a little better. Oh, look, here's his favorite Jack London book. My son has loved this writer since he was a child, and as an adult, he still reads this author from time to time. How nice it is to hold this book in your hands, knowing that it was read by our boy," sadly said the old woman, and carefully opened the title page, and to their surprise, they saw a shocking message that was addressed to them. The couple looked at each other in bewilderment, and then the owner of the apartment took a piece of paper in his hands and began to read softly. At the first lines, the couple wept. John took a few deep breaths and continued reading. The message written to Anthony read as follows. My dearly beloved parents, these lines I address to you. I am madly glad that I was brought up by you. As such a mom and dad still need to be found in the whole world. I address all kind and affectionate words to you. I express all my gratitude only to you in the first place. And now I will come to the point. If you are reading this message, then I am no longer alive. Otherwise, I would have destroyed this message. The point is that I have committed an atrocity, but again, in order to save a little man, whose name is Anthony, like me. He is your grandson. That is my son, whom I have just recently learned about. But about this, you will tell you Sarah herself, who came to me for help. You can be sure that Anthony is my son. You will find the same mole as mine on my right leg, where the ankle is. Sarah hid everything from me, but that's not the point. The main thing is that I haven't hair, and so I will continue. The whole thing is that the child from birth has a disease, and to cure it requires surgery. Naturally, such finances I do not have, and Sarah, and even more so, especially since she lives alone for a long time since her grandmother died. And it is not easy for her in terms of finances, as there is nowhere to wait for help, and I did not help because I did not know that there is a son. Sarah found me and asked me for money for the child's operation. To get them in a short time is impossible, and the time, as they say, was ticking. That's why I decided to commit a crime. I won't give you all the details. Basically, I defrauded a very wealthy and important man. I blackmailed him out of a very large sum of money, which I gave to Sarah. And then I made the unbelievable mistake of blackmailing him again so that I could finance the baby's rehabilitation. That's when I realized I shouldn't have done it, but there was no turning back, and I became an unnecessary witness from that moment on. I was well aware that I was walking on a knife edge, but I had no choice in the situation. I'm very sorry for the way things turned out. I'm asking you to help Sarah because she has no one else but you and my son. I forgave her for the lie, as I continued to love her all these years. That's why I didn't have relationships with other girls. P.S. I love you a lot. Don't grieve for me. Little Anthony still needs you and you need him. I know you will get along great with your grandson and his mom, and may she be happy and find someone else in her life who will love her as I did. Don't tell her I'm gone. I don't want her to blame herself in the future. Let her think that I've gone to another city and I'm happy there. The stunned parents sat in silence and digested the message they had read. None of them expected that they would find this note and that it would contain so much information. The first to break the silence was Lucy, who said through sobs, "He asked me for money and I said only in the bank." From then on, I began to notice that my son wasn't doing well. And then when he was beaten, I also realized that not everything is not smooth with our boy. I'm such a bad mother for not recognizing my own son's troubles. I'm going to blame myself for the rest of my life for not being able to help our boy in time. Honey, stop beating yourself up. It's not your fault. I'm more interested in why Sarah hid the fact that she was pregnant with Anthony's baby. It's not fair to the boy's father. We've wasted so much time, and we could have been babysitting. That makes the kid about 5 years old. We need to talk to this girl right away. Lucy took the message from her husband's hands and gently pressed it to her chest. Tears were continuously streaming down the elderly woman's cheeks. She brought the note to her eyes and began to reread it. John looked anxiously at his spouse at this moment. The man worried that his wife might become ill with her heart. With the first impressions from reading the shocking message passed, Lucy looked at her spouse puzzled and said with horror that she did not have Sarah's number. The man coughed and reminded his wife that she had gone to visit the girl to talk to her grandmother. The older woman thought for a moment and then slapped her forehead with the words, "That's right, I was talking to her grandmother. You see how old age has crept up on us unnoticed. But wait, it's uncomfortable without warning. Why are you talking nonsense again? You're Anthony the grandmother and I'm the grandfather. We'll buy candy, fruit, a cool radio-controlled car and come visit. Let's do it today. It's not too late. By the way, we need to talk to you about Anthony telling Sarah not to say anything about being dead. Do you think that's right?" John said. "I think it's right to tell, but I think it's right to keep the reason about the money out of it. She'll really feel bad that Anthony died for the sake of her son. Although I do think a true parent should go to any lengths to save their child." The couple soon packed up and went shopping. The couple bought all kinds of sweets, different fruits, and a big radio-controlled racing car. And after a while, the elderly people stood near the front door trying to hear the children's voice. And then the door across the hall opened, and an old woman angrily exclaimed, "Why are you eavesdropping here? Are you trying to rob me? You crooks. At such a respectable age, and yet you still want to steal. I'll call the police." "No law enforcement. We're here to visit Sarah and Anthony. We just wanted to know if they were home or not," John said in an agitated voice. "Ah, he will. Only if they were. They're home. They just got home from daycare. When Anthony comes home from daycare, the whole neighborhood knows it." The same kid announces the news to the whole neighborhood and gesticulates desperately with his hands, the neighbor said with a chuckle. The couple looked at each other after these words of the stranger. They understood each other without words. After all, their son was returning from kindergarten in the same way. He talked loudly and always gesticulated, and now their grandson was carrying on the same tradition. The couple smiled between themselves, and John confidently pressed the doorbell. A minute or two later, they were answered by Sarah, who looked dumbfounded at the couple. The young woman hadn't expected them to come, so she didn't know what to say. Lucy had fully expected such a reaction, so she spoke first. "Hello, Sarah. Would you let us in? I think we have a lot to talk about. It's uncomfortable on the doorstep, and it's drafty in here, and Anthony's still a little... He and I had a big fight, and I told him not to come to me anymore because I have another young man. Your son freaked out and wished me luck. And then I found out sometime later that I was in an interesting position. I wanted to abort the pregnancy. Why become a single mother at this age? But I was persuaded by my grandmother not to do it. She said that the first time it is better to give birth, it is advised in gynecologists. In the end, I kept the baby and I don't regret it at all. After that, I wanted to inform Anthony about my interesting position, but Julia sent me a photo with him where she wrote that they were happy. And these pictures were not few, and it took me angry that the guy so quickly switched to another girl after the fight. And I decided that I would raise the child by my own efforts, especially with me next to my grandmother, who always came to my rescue. When Anthony was born, I immediately decided to name him after my dad because he looks very much like him, and you can see it yourself. Even a mole in the same place. At this point, the young woman paused and looked lovingly at her son, who continued to explore the car. Sarah then turned to her guest and continued her narrative. Anthony was born weak and had a serious illness. We coped with his grandmother together, and then she was gone and all the burdens fell on my shoulders. I will tell you right away that it was very difficult financially, but to turn to your son for money did not allow pride. And then the child got worse. He was hospitalized and told to look for money. And where could I get such a large sum of money? That's when I decided to find your son. I was afraid to turn to you because I thought that you would not believe me. You would say that I had a child and claim rights. The young woman paused and looked at the couple, who listened to her attentively. Sarah shifted her gaze to the child and continued speaking again. Your son promised to help me, though he called me stupid for believing Julia. I'm the one who only recently found out that he's been living alone all this time. He tried to start relationships with girls, but it didn't work out. And I didn't even try to find my soulmate because I was busy taking care of the baby. Anthony brought money. I asked him where he got such a large sum, but the guy was joking. I saw him about 3 times, and then he just disappeared. No calls, no visits, and I thought he didn't need us anymore. And I even hoped that we could start a family with him, but I was wrong. That's basically the whole story. After Sarah's story, all the adults were silent. Only the delighted voice of the child, who was playing with the car, was heard. Lucy looked attentively and at the same time fondly at her grandson. And only after a while the guest uttered, "You really are a silly girl. You should have initially told about this Lita to your chosen one, and not to make your own incomprehensible conclusions. I can't hide that Anthony, after the breakup with you after some time, tried to build a relationship with her, but it didn't work out. But now it's too late to talk about it, because the past can't be returned, as well as Anthony." After this phrase, the landlady froze. She looked perplexedly at Lucy, and then asked to explain what "no Anthony" meant. And the old woman smiled sadly and tears came to her eyes. She said quietly that only part of the message had been spoken. Sarah was still staring at her interlocutor incomprehensively. Lucy saw that she had shocked the girl, so she continued speaking softly. Anthony died at the hands of hooligans. As they say, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he loved you the whole time. He asked me and my grandfather to help you, and we'd love to do that because your little boy is part of our child. And we, like you, have no one else. We all need to stick together because we need to get Anthony back on his feet. I don't suppose you're opposed to that suggestion. Sarah covered her face with her hands and cried quietly. No one said anything else to the young woman. The couple realized that the landlady needed time to perceive the grief message. The girl tried to pull herself together, but her emotions were running high and she couldn't help herself and cried to tears. The boy looked fearfully at his mother and cried too. At that moment, Lucy got up and came to Sarah. She hugged her son's lover and quietly asked her to calm down so as not to scare her son. The girl nodded gratefully in response and hugged Anthony's mother as well. And then the young woman pronounced, "You are always welcome to come to us anytime, for you are Anthony's own grandparents, and I would only be grateful if we could be related to you. I would love to call you Mom and Dad, and I'm going to explain to my son who you are so he can see you as family. It is very wonderful that you have made this decision, because Anthony is in heaven and I am sure he is watching everything and is happy for us. And I would love to call you daughter, even though I lost a son, but in return the Lord gave me a daughter and a grandson." Sarah hugged John and the guest again and said, "Can I ask you just one thing? I want to go to Anthony's grave to talk to him. I would like to do it alone. You understand, don't you?" "Of course we understand. You have a lot to talk to Anthony about, but I want to add to you that our son wishes you nothing but happiness in the future, so you should try to promise him that." "I understand and I will do that. And please forgive me for everything. I'm to blame for a lot of things," Sarah said quietly. "But don't blame yourself. You are starting life with a new leaf, where you have a son and parents, and God willing in the future you will find a loved one, with whom you will give us a granddaughter too," replied Lucy affectionately and then called her grandson. As soon as the boy came, she said, "Hello, grandson. I am your grandmother, and next to me is your grandfather, and we will see each other often, and you will definitely tell us about your news in kindergarten. Your grandfather and I will be interested to know all about you." A few days later, Sarah went to the cemetery with John, and the grandmother stayed with little Anthony. As soon as the young woman found herself near the grave, she asked the older man to leave her alone. John did not hesitate to fulfill the girl's request. He stepped aside so as not to interfere with her communication with the deceased. The young woman carefully squatted down, laid a beautiful bouquet of artificial roses on the grave, and then gently wiped the photograph with the back of her hand and softly began to speak. "Hello, Anthony. This is not where I expected to meet you. I dreamed of being reunited, and you see how it turned out. You're now in the damp earth, and I'm coming to you. If things could be changed, I'd give anything for it, except our little boy. I'm glad you got to see him just a few times in this life. Now, by chance, we'll be in close contact with your parents, and that's to your credit and no one else's. Your message brought John and Lucy to me, and now our son will have grandparents. I was told by your mom that you wish me happiness, and for that I thank you so much. I here and now vow that I will definitely become a happy person and that you, looking at me and my son, rejoice for us. And one more thing, I promise you that I will never forget you, as I have a part of you growing up. I really hope you don't hold a grudge against me, but it's both of our fault that our paths have diverged, but it's too late to talk about it now. All I have to do is hold my head up proudly and go on my way, and I will. And now I will say goodbye to you and call your father. He is here with me too." After these words, the young woman called John and invited him to her son's grave. The elderly man also laid a bouquet of artificial flowers, bent down and kissed the photo on the monument, and only then spoke. "Hi, son. I want to thank you for your grandson. He is just like you, not only in appearance, but also in behavior. We have withheld only a part of your address, but it's better for you in heaven. And now your mother and I will visit you often if we can. And we will be sure to tell you about your son's achievements. I know very well that you hear me now and are happy that we have become one family. You know that I am not a great one for speeches, so I will say that you are forever in our hearts and we love you and will never forget you. And now it's time to return to the little mischievous boy, who has probably already fed his grandmother with his stories about everyday life in kindergarten. And one last thing. Thank you for the money. It really helped your son. You did what you thought was right. Sometimes in life you have to make tough decisions, and you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. That's all I have to say. So I'll see you next time. John turned to Sarah and politely offered to go home. The young woman nodded gratefully and hugged the older man tenderly, whispering, "Thank you, Dad, and I'll thank my mom at home. Now let's hurry up, because the wind is picking up outside." The two adults moved leisurely toward the exit from the cemetery. Each of them was thinking about something else. Sarah was glad that she could say everything she had on her mind at the grave, and the elderly man wanted to get home as soon as possible to play with his grandson. After a while, John and the girl arrived home, where they were met by Lucy, who had time to bake a duck with apples and boil semolina for the baby. Soon the adults set the table, sat little Anthony at the table in a place of honor, and began to celebrate the reunion. After everyone had eaten, then Sarah went to Lucy and hugged her tenderly, and then kissed her on the cheek and said, "You are the most wonderful mom in the world. Your son told me so. He was very proud of you, and from now on I will only address you as Mom too. And also I want to become like you, because you are a very wise woman, and Anthony was not in vain proud of you and his father. And these are not made-up words your son told me. Thank you, Mom, for everything." Lucy had tears after these words, and she slightly audibly said, "I know that my son was a good man, and thank you too for your warm words. I really hope that you will bring up your boy also a worthy man in life. I love you, my daughter. And do not forget that you promised my son to be happy. We also want it with his father, and the promise must be fulfilled. We have such a motto in our family, so you will have to accept it. There is no other way." After that, the two women hugged each other and laughed happily. The head of the family came up to them and asked with bewilderment what he had missed so funny. Sarah, seeing the incomprehension of the owner of the apartment, laughed even more. Looking at her mother, little Anthony started laughing, and the rest of the adults followed.